Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Started by a group of citizens in a small Michigan town with a like-minded goal
of increasing the visibility
of the unseen and unheard populations in our community.
Our guests will share stories and insights
with the goal of increasing our awareness and knowledge
of various aspects of diversity and equity
to create a more connected, empathetic, and inclusive community.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
Welcome back to the Visibility Project podcast. I'm your host, Jeremiah Lee.
Spearheaded by members of the Cultural Awareness Coalition, the project is the brainchild of several organizations and individuals with shared values who sit on a project steering team. We hope that the podcast series creates a deeper empathy for others and serves as a catalyst for people to actively create a more inclusive community and world.
In our last episode, we discussed legislation impacting the LGBTQ community and the recent passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This month, in light of the recent election and upcoming holiday season, we are going to talk about how to better communicate with those who have different opinions and views than our own. You will hear from two of the founders of the Visibility Project, Dr. Gina Wilson and Sarah Weisbarth. These two have a wealth of knowledge and perspective and will give us tools that will help us communicate to create connection, understanding, empathy, and explore our differences in a constructive way. Dr. Gina Wilson spent 20 years as a public school educator, working to mitigate the effects of environmental and educational barriers for students, including creating a trauma-informed program model to meet students' social, emotional needs by blending restorative practices mindfulness, allowing students to self-actualize in a classroom setting. Dr. Wilson is currently an assistant professor of educational leadership at Central Michigan University, where she earned her doctorate of education. Her research focuses on understanding how teachers and district leaders' mindset, practices, and self-efficacy help and hinder social justice and equity work in schools. Sarah Weisbarth is a coach and facilitator in the areas of communication and leadership, working and serving with a variety of agencies including Our Community Listens, Midland Wellbeing Coalition, Self-Love Beauty, and others. She is committed to helping people connect through communication. She is a native to Michigan and appreciates all that this state has to offer. She self-describes as messy, introspective, hopeful, simplistic, and a lover of life.
Well, welcome, Gina and Sarah. I'm so glad to have you here today. So I'm going to ask a question to both of you, actually, and I'm going to start with you, Gina. Why is this work important to you?
This work is important to me because I really believe in the importance of authentic and quality relationships in your life. I think that they add value and are a really big reason why we're here. I was raised in a family that always had a large community that we considered our community, our family, not just our nuclear family. And so we were connected and we loved people as if they were our blood relatives at that deep of a level. And I came from a diverse space. I was raised in a predominantly white neighborhood. I went to predominantly white schools, but my church was very diverse, African-American, Latinx community. We often participated in diverse religious settings. So I learned from an early age that I could find value, connection, love, care, quality relationships from people that didn't look like me. And so that's something that I have tried to emulate that in my family, and my son now refers to it as, he's named it as a framily. So friends become family combined together, and we have lots of framily members. That's why it's important to me.
I love that, family members.
Family members, yeah.
Sarah, I'm going to ask the same thing to you. Why is this important to you?
I want to be part of Gina's family.
You are, dear friend, you are.
It's really important to me because my story is actually very different than Gina's, although I would align with that desire for that authentic relationship. But it's motivated from a perspective of I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have close relationships with my family or friends. And I grew up in a predominantly middle-class, white, out in the county country environment and did not have a lot of diversity. And so then when I started to grow up and then be part of other communities, it was almost a culture shock for me and a huge learning curve. And then I started to really question. I didn't understand maybe the values that I was raised with, because what I was now experiencing and seeing out in the world was completely different and felt more authentic to me. Having that diversity, having those rich relationships, having different perspectives, I think was something I had been craving. And now I love it. And I want others to have that. And knowing that there are people out there still experiencing division around the topics that we cover, it hurts my heart. It hurts my heart. So that's why this work is so important to me.
Yeah, and I think you're right that there are people still experiencing those divisions daily. So thank you for being here and sharing your experiences. So my next question to both of you here is there's so much division happening in our nation and our world. What are we missing when it comes to creating unity and connection and understanding? I guess I'll start with Sarah with that one.
I'm really glad we're asking this question because, as I just said, this is the part that hurts my heart. I am not the type of individual that is out there being an activist. I don't have that kind of energy and that kind of ability. But what I can do is see the hurting and see the division, and not just the division because we're different, but the division of how we're interacting, how we're treating one another because of our perceived differences or how we experience differences. And I think that's the thing that we're missing, is the ability to start to understand one another and come closer together, whether it's on an issue. But for me, it's primarily coming closer together in relationship. If we can start to see people as people and individuals with their own values and emotions and shared experiences or diverse experiences, that's when we're going to start to see change. And I wish people would start to treat others like they would treat their mother or their child or their grandparent, and look towards those ways to connect and understanding because of relationships.
Building off of what Sarah said, because I agree with everything she said wholeheartedly, is that when we close ourselves off to connection and relationship, it's just such a lost opportunity. And so when you hold someone, whether it's because of you or perspective or experience, as different, and then you judge that different, as you add value to that different, like they're different, so therefore they're bad because I'm good, or they're, just that we create those binary spaces that we exist in and we add value to them. So then we can't see them in anything else but that negative space that we've created for them, instead of just saying they're different and it's a different that I'm not aware of and it's different from mine. And then making the choice, instead of adding judgment and value, negative value, to say, I want to learn about it. Let me get curious. Let me seek knowledge. And there's lots of different ways to do that. I mean, I think the best way is to just engage in a conversation, make a human connection, but there's also ways to, read a book about that experience that you think you're unfamiliar with, or read an article or listen to a podcast about an experience that maybe you have a curiosity around, or you have found that there's like a knowledge lapse. And that doesn't add, like, if you don't know about someone else's lived experience, that doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make you less of a human. It doesn't make you uneducated. It means you haven't experienced that or come across information to shed light on it. And so let's make the choice to do that ourselves. And so it's really making that intentional choice that when I encounter different, I'm going to do so without judgment and without placing a negative value on it, but instead interacting with it in a curious way.
Powerful stuff. Thank you, Gina. So my next question to both of you here is, so we all know people and often care about people whose knowledge and experiences or opinions or views are very different from our own. So how do we find a way to share our different vantage point
in a way that we can learn from each other. Gina, do you want to lead us off on this one?
Sure. I come from so I'm going to give you my labels on what people may see when they see me, that depending on their vantage point could bring negativity or positivity. So I am from a Mexican American. I come from, I'm a part of the Latinx community. I'm a female. I have dark hair, darker complected. My husband is African American. My daughter has a disability that sometimes can be visible depending on what she's trying to participate in. So any of those things that we carry as we walk around the earth, depending on how they are received, can be received or perceived in a negative way or a positive way. It's not a responsibility. I have the choice to assume that people are always going to receive me in a negative way and have my defenses up and be waiting, in defense. I also have the choice to assume the best of people. And I tend to reside in the benefit of the doubt for two reasons, and they're very selfish. One is because I could not live in a world where I assumed the worst of everybody I was going to encounter. That would be a horrible existence. And two, because I think then I'm emulating what I want back. So if I'm, open and, smiling and friendly and helpful, right, in moments of, micro interaction as I endeavor, the world, I'm hoping that is then what I receive back. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And then I have the choice as well to say, why didn't I receive that back? And I could again go into the negative thought spiral of it's because I'm Mexican. It's because my husband's Black. It's because my daughter's disabled. It's because all of those things I carry in my viewpoint, in my optic. Or I can say, wow, that person must have been really busy. Or that person didn't see that I smiled at them. So again, it's my choice on how I receive what they put out. And I'm always going to receive it in the benefit of the doubt until I know differently.
I'm just going to jump right in. It's really intriguing to think about how we label things we see, and whether that's from a visual that we see of people or whether it's from a behavior they exhibit. But we tend to judge and we tend to label the things that we see. And what I hear you saying is coming from a different perspective, or being willing to see the perspective of another, is really crucial. And then how do we communicate so that we can come to some sort of understanding? And I think if I had to directly answer this question, Jeremiah, it would be about, well, how are we communicating towards understanding? How am I slowing down to listen to someone else, to hear their perspective, just like Gina has really just kind of mapped out? Like, how do I stop myself from forming that judgment and then listen to them with that curiosity, which I think we're going to mention a lot, of, wow, I wonder what's going on for them. What is their experience like? How does that relate to my experience? How can I then share my experience with them in a way that then we can start to create connection? And it's hard. And I'll just be honest with our audience. There are moments where I'm like, why do I always have to be the one, right? Why do I always have to be the one to like dial back and slow down and figure out how to listen and notice the judgment that's happening in myself and get curious with that, and then set it aside and recognize that that's not the person I want to be, because I too don't want to live in that world that Gina described, of just always wanting to have that negative perspective of people. I always want to assume the best, yet that can be very wearing when we're experiencing so much negativity and so much judgment and energy. I don't know how to describe it, like this intense energy about almost wanting to maintain the differences, or wanting to maintain this position of being right, or wanting my perspective to be heard more than yours. And so I think for me, it's about slowing down, being aware, really listening to understand before I move into speaking so I'm understood.
Well, and Sarah, I like what you said about being right, because I think that context often comes into play. Like I gave the example of me, running, coming across someone someone who's a stranger, right? Not even an acquaintance. And then, maybe being in control of my perception, right, of that stranger's interaction with me and my family. But sometimes we really get engaged, locked in with someone that we care about, that we already in an existing relationship with, that has a counterpoint or a counter viewpoint, that then we get focused in on that right and wrong, right? That I'm right, you're wrong, and that's where I think it becomes difficult because we care about that person. And I know for me, I push the hardest to influence that person's opinion when I love them the most, because I don't want them being viewed in a way. Yeah, I want people to view them in the way that I view them. And I know if they're communicating about, a vantage point that maybe could be viewed as harmful or damaging or racist or ableist or any of those labels that we're giving viewpoints these days, I'm like, people aren't going to know you. Like when you say that. So I push even harder, like I need to be right because I'm saving you from this viewpoint, so you kind of get into that self-righteous space of like, I'm doing this for the good of you and for the good of mankind. I must fight your viewpoint. And that becomes very difficult because when you're in that stance, and I have found that when I've been in that stance and fought the hardest, it has been with those that I love the most, but it also has been my least effective because I am justifying by any means necessary to change this opinion, which has affected negatively good, long-standing relationships.
Thank you both for that. And Sarah, I can't forget that listening, not only listening, but listening to understand. I think that's so powerful. And so my next question is kind of add on and a follow-up to that is, so it seems like differences are impacting these relationships. People are ending relationships instead of creating opportunities to come close together, kind of like you mentioned, Gina. So how do we learn to listen while speaking to be heard? And I think that's kind of what we were just talking about. I mean, how can we learn to listen and to understand while speaking to also be heard?
I think for me, it's about this concept of acceptance. And I want to make really, really clear. I feel like there are behaviors, there are actions, there are systems in place that are unacceptable. And I would never want people to feel like that when we talk about the spirit of acceptance, that we're suggesting, well, just deal with it. You just have to be okay with it.
Exactly.
Acceptance for me is about how do I accept the person, even when I find a behavior or a situation or a system unacceptable? How do I pause and look at that individual and say, just like Gina was talking about, like, I want to be in relationship with you. I don't want to lose this relationship, but I fundamentally can't be okay with this behavior. But I can choose to maybe see you where you're at and accept you as a person. And it's so difficult to tease those two apart and say, well, I'm not okay with this behavior or the situation, but I still want to figure out how to be in relationship with you and accept you as an individual and where you're at. Because if I can do that, then I have a chance, right? Then I have that chance of like maybe influencing or bringing my perspective in such a way that individual can grow and shift. And this is, again, it's incredibly hard. I have many people in my life that share a very strong opinion that's different than mine. And much like Gina was saying, like, I don't want people to see them that way. And I don't want people to see me that way because of those people in my life. And I have to just hold on tight sometimes when I'm listening to things that are just so counter to what my heart and my values tell me, and just see them as who they are in their own frustration, their, maybe anger, their own perspective from their own lived experience, even though it's so counter to what I, again, me talking about my needs and my values and my perspective, believe to be true. It's hard. I always feel like I've said it's hard 10 times, but I feel like for me, the work is on me. Like I'm the only one I have the opportunity to change. And so the work has to start with me. And for me, it's about trying to figure out how to understand where they're coming from, valuing the relationship. So then I have the opportunity to start to influence then their behavior and their perspective.
Thank you so much for Sarah. And I realize it's hard. Now let's get to like a specific then. So say you're in a moment with somebody and you're talking to them and they say something that you just cannot agree with. So what is your personal strategy in that moment?
Well, for me, I'm going to, and this is where it's a self-awareness that Sarah said. You have to have been self-aware of what is going to cause you to have some emotion and attend that you're able to engage in the kind of conversation or dialogue or that's going to be constructive, similar to what Sarah said, that you're going to be able to even understand it. And it's not just going to be two people throwing words at each other. Right. Because it seems that that's where we're at right now with a lot of it's just a lot of words being thrown to the air that are never landing in the ears or on the heart, which is where we want our words to land, right? In the ears, on the heart, then in the brain. So check yourself to make sure that you are able to be that impactful vessel, so to speak, of whatever counterpoint you're going to bring. And that's the work where you have to understand where you feel strong enough. The other thing that I do is like, do I care enough about this person to engage in time with them? Or is this statement so harmful that if I don't correct it, people are unsafe with this thought or rhetoric being out there? Right. So those are kind of my three things. If I'm not in the correct energy space, that I need to do something, but I've understood that I care about this person and it's an important safety, it's a safety about a population that maybe this could cause harm to, then I need to get myself in gear pretty quickly, and that's where I practice mindfulness. So I'll take a couple deep breaths, settle myself, anchor myself, get myself back to where I need to be. And then I will engage in discourse. And I say discourse because it is a conversation that will transform and disrupt perspective. It's only through conversation and dialogue. And I typically set a boundary for myself that I am willing to talk to you about this, but I will not talk to you if you get abusive or if, you start using this type of language, inflammatory language, or this starts to be harmful, because then it's not helpful. And it's almost like I'm setting an agreement with that other person. And it's not fair for me to agree to those things, kind of like Sarah said. Why is it always me? I'm not going to put myself out there with empathy and understanding and in vein of acceptance if this person is not going to meet me even, meet me part of the way on that. So if that person can agree to those common agreements, then there's no work to do here. You've shown me who you are. And until you're ready to be someone different, which is what I would say, if they didn't agree to that, I'd say then this isn't the opportunity to talk, but I'm open when you're ready. I've already shared with you my conditions. So keeping it open, but also setting firm boundaries to keep you from harm and to not allowing just airspace for people.
Sarah, so what is your personal strategy? Do you have anything different to add on top of Gina's? I think that's really powerful tools that we should be aware of.
Yeah, I don't think there is anything to add other than to reiterate. I love the 3-step process of like, am I in the space? Right. And for me, it's about, do I even have the strength? Right. Because I tend to be more a little like laid back. I'm more reflective. I'm in a more of a soft space for myself, more vulnerable, I think, than I think I need to be to maybe engage in some of these conversations. So I have to assess that for me. Do I have the strength to step into this vulnerable, what I perceive to be a risky moment? And so, doing that, if the relationship is important enough, and then knowing where those boundaries are, Gina, I love that. And I don't think there's absolutely anything else I could add. And other than, I feel like people have to assess that for themselves and get really good and really clear about what they're going to choose to be okay with and what they're going to choose to not be okay with. And then have almost that step practice process in their minds of, how are you going to confront when someone's raising their voice? How are you going to confront when someone is using language that is hurtful and harmful, either to you or to the situation? And start to even maybe develop scripts in your mind as you're going to engage in a conversation with someone, being prepared. If they do this, then I'm going to say this. If they do that, then how am I going to shift? And making that adjustment. I think then too, as I go deeper into conversations with people, if I've stepped into the space, if I've taken the risk and I've stepped into the space, maintaining that curiosity has been really helpful for me. I come from a background of coaching and teaching and training. And so being able to shift into almost like an inquisitive space, maybe asking some questions around, well, help me understand, or go on about that. Or, could you clarify? Or I wonder what that's about, when people are talking about things they're struggling with in this space, allows them to start to think about their own perspective. And they might be talking about an issue, but if you can start to get curious, it might help them to understand what's behind that issue for them. Because that's where I think change happens, when we can do that self-awareness. Now, it sounds like Gina and I feel like, okay, I'm pretty self-aware, but how can we help others start to engage in that curiosity?
Well, and speaking of self-awareness, because I do fancy myself pretty self-aware until I find myself in a place I'm not aware of. And I will describe to you how I know where the work, the tagline of this visibility project is, let's do the work. And a lot of times when you say, let's do the work, we think we're doing the work for someone on behalf of, in holding space for. But in actuality, the work is ourselves. Absolutely. And typically when I find out where my next workspace resides, it's because I have messed up horribly or I have fumbled horribly, or I have gone out of this effective script that I created using Sarah's language. I've gone out of this effective script and I'm just throwing words. I'm just throwing words and knowledge, and no one's catching them. They're falling all over the floor. And so the self-awareness piece also comes with reflection, because go back and say, what did my intent match the impact? And so then if you can say, wow, they're living in 2 different countries, this is where some work resides for me. I think, and that's on an ongoing process, because you never come wholly self-aware, because to say that you're wholly self-aware, you would mean that you've experienced everything there is to experience. And what we know is that every moment that we're in with other human beings is the most precious moment, because it will never exist again. Because we are ever changing beings, from perspective, from experience, from happenstances, from knowledge base, from mindsets. There is not another moment that repeats ever in our lifetime. And so you have to stay knees bent, ready to learn and self-reflect all the time.
I have to share one of my favorite quotes. I spent a number of years in Japan, and one of my favorite quotes is this Japanese saying called Ichigo Ichie. Like it's kind of a Buddhist, comes from Buddhist origins, where it's this idea behind that Ichigo is like for every encounter, we only have one chance. So we are only going to be in this room together once in our life. So to learn from each other and from each other's experiences, it's this behind this idea of impermanence, where every instant only happens once. So because of that, we should value that and try to learn all we can from it. I have it on my wall at my office and at home. It's something that I hold dearly to me. It's something to appreciate every moment and try to learn from the experiences of others, and to value those, because it's fleeting. Every moment is. Yeah. So
Maya Angelou has a quote that I often use to start a class or to start my day, and it says, this is a wonderful day. I've never seen this one before. And truly that's the truth for not only every day, but every moment is a new moment, which means every moment is a new opportunity to do better.
Absolutely. So we have this idea that it's really about being proactive and self-aware and reflecting too. But sometimes we get into the conversation and it gets to this point where, okay, let's just agree to disagree. So instead of just agreeing to disagree, which can be the simplest answer, essentially just walking away from the conversation, what are some suggestions to instead engage in more meaningful conversation about these issues when it comes to that point where let's agree to disagree? How can we delve deeper? Sarah, do you want to lead us off on this one?
Yeah, I'm just enjoying reflecting on the previous commentary about the self-awareness, because I think that's probably one of my key strategies in this particular moment of, there might be something I'm unaware of, right? So almost being like self-aware to be like, oh, I'm about to learn something new, like, or I have a gap, or I have a knowledge area that is completely foreign to me. Make a mental note, go look that up, find a friend, get some more information. I'm usually information driven. And so again, it's got to start with that self-awareness of being then aware of where are my gaps. And one of the things almost before I get into the conversation that I have done over the years, if I go back to my original story of living in a very, very, I couldn't even say neutral environment. I just lived in a very singular experience environment. I've intentionally worked on changing that. Who am I surrounding myself with? Who am I engaging in conversation with? What am I reading? What am I listening to? Who am I developing friendships or work relationships with to start to expand my perspective? Because then I think that increases my own awareness and my own ability to engage in that relatedness around hard topics, whatever they are.
I was going to build off of that knowledge seeking before you went into the agree to disagree, because you gave so many tangible ways to expand your knowledge base and your curiosity around different life experiences. And I really wanted to say exactly what you did. Of how, who am I socializing with? What am I aware of that's going on outside of my experience? For me, because I'm a lover of books, I always start with fiction. I always ask myself, who is the character in my books? Is it always a white female? Is it always a Latinx female? Is it, how do I expand? Fiction is a really easy, safe on-ramping to get to learn other perspectives and to create comfort around different. And then you can move out, because typically, nonfiction or fiction authors are so good about infusing nonfiction facts into them that then you can follow that curiosity, right? Down that knowledge base. But those micro moments, Sarah, that you listed are so powerful when you put intent behind them. So I just kind of wanted to amplify that.
Yay. I just so know that feels very affirming. So thank you. I feel like
you're right, because that's what you have to do. You have to push yourself further than where you are at.
Absolutely.
So Sarah, what are your thoughts then? Like some strategies then we can use for, instead of just agreeing to disagree and beyond just expanding our own personal, because that's a lot about doing the work. Now in these moments of conversation, how can we engage in these meaningful conversations instead of stepping away from the conversation?
For me, it's courage. It's a courage to go into the discomfort maybe that I'm experiencing because I now have an awareness I'm about to learn some information about, or maybe it's going to be about helping someone else join in that. So for one, for me, it's just like almost making a little like assessment. Like, is this something I really want to do? How we talked about earlier, like, is this a relationship I really want to engage with? This is something I want to do. For me, it is about suspending that judgment and staying in that curiosity too, because I'm probably hearing things from an individual that are going to be hard for me to hear. So if I can just kind of take it in that space of like, wow, they're going through something, they have an experience that is not mine, and be curious about it, and just step into it with courage.
And, that's often a response. Well, let's just agree to disagree, right? And you've heard it and I've heard it. And so I've crafted a script response to it. So what I've responded to my friends who have said that is, so what you're choosing then is to not know me, is to not know a perspective, is to not hear an experience because you don't agree with it. You're unknowledgeable about it. It makes you uncomfortable, right? I'm speculating because I don't even know why, because you've chosen not to share it with me. And so I'll counter that with, don't we trust each other? Like, haven't we been through a lot that we can get through this conversation, that we can reconcile and find common ground and learn from each other? Like, isn't that what relationships are about? And so challenging even that statement, because when you agree to disagree, you've created space in a relationship that there is something that is now not accessible. And relationships are vulnerable. They're intimate. They're, connected. And when there are bricks, brick by brick, like every agree to disagree moment is a brick, right? That keeps you further distance from that person that you had a relationship with. And so and for the person who wants to engage, it can also feel like a rejection, which brings in so much more complicatedness to relationships, especially when it's in a family where maybe you have where you're obligated in that relationship, or you'll have many interactions with them, or someone that you've known your whole life, but you have gone to different political sides or different knowledge sides, or, whatever. You then have said, I'm leaving you behind to move this way. And I can't judge someone if they choose it, but I want them to know they are consciously making that choice to disconnect, and to disengage from this relationship. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they're like, wow, I didn't realize that was due, that would put that kind of space in our relationship. So just that counter of, okay, so I'm just letting you know, this is what you're choosing. Right. And there's consequences to agreeing to disagree.
Gina, I really like that you framed it that way, because for me, a strategy can be like, I'm just going to mentally check out because I don't have the courage, or I don't have the strength, or I don't have the fortitude to have this conversation. Yet listening to you, there's a consequence to that me even choosing to mentally check out. And there's a consequence to the relationship, but there's also a consequence to there's no opportunity for change then. Like whatever the topic that's being addressed, the needle won't move if I don't choose to stay engaged. And I think that's the end of my statement, because I'm in a moment of self-awareness. This is what it looks like. I'm in a moment of self-awareness being like, well, now that's interesting.
But
even if I choose, there's a consequence.
Well, and I do want to say that self-preservation and self-care and boundary setting is really important in this work. So a way to say all of what I said is, are you agreeing? Do we have to agree to disagree forever? Or is this just a pause? Because if it's just a pause because we don't have the energy, or we don't have the knowledge yet to come, or we haven't really reconciled it within self to have this conversation, then it's just a pause. It's a yet, right? I'm not ready to have this conversation yet. But the phrasing of agree to disagree there's finality to that, because that's an agreement. That's a yes between the two of us. We are agreeing that we disagree on this and we are moving forward. And it feels like it's never to be entertained again. And that's then where the consequence resides. But that pause, right? That and you can even say that because I think a lot of because of the pandemic and our social structures, a lot of our interactions and communications are happening via social media, that you can send a quiet private message to say, I read your Facebook post. I really want to talk to you about it. I'm not ready yet, but would you be open to that? Because then you're not, condemning them. You're not coming at them. You're not doing it publicly, but you are letting them know that that there's something here that needs to be discussed because this is making you uncomfortable. Right. And so, it's just that initial connection is important to keep that relationship in a good space, but definitely always set a boundary. And that's more than healthy, and it's essential.
Thank you.
I have the phrase in my head, like, I'm going to laugh when I say it out loud, like you make it personal. But I think sometimes when we're trying to get our point across and we're almost attacking others, we're making it personal in a negative way. I use that phrase make it personal because this is personal between the two of us. This is an opportunity to connect and share and relate on a one-to-one level. And then also even helping to bring perspectives of, when people are judging others and putting labels on people, they do them in these general groupings, those people. Well, what if one of those people, again, was your grandchild, was your best friend, was your mom, was, someone that's incredibly precious to you. So I think almost kind of bringing it down to a personal level is a way to engage with individuals.
Well, and I think our most impactful learnings come when, and I'm going to use language I learned from Sarah, that when my knowledge base is disrupted, right, my biggest transformations come. And typically, significant disruption comes when empathy and understanding, and that comes through personal stories. That's actually one of the main tenets of this podcast is, so it has to get personal, Sarah. You're absolutely right. It has to, because it's what connects us to then the commonality of us as humans in this communal space. And without that connection, when we keep it at that agree to disagree space, then we have chosen not to get personal because, and for me, it's then to choose not to learn, not to grow, not to transform, not to connect and do all those things that make a vibrant, quality, high level life.
And when we don't let it get personal or have that connection, it reinforces the idea of otherness, right?
It does.
Like you are the other, even if they're someone who's close to us, as we group them in, as you said, group them into somebody who's other and different. And we put up that wall then with those others. I want to ask both of you in our final question then, what are a couple key takeaways, I think, for our audience members? What would you want as we end today? What are some key takeaways, some lasting moments from both of you for our audience today?
For me, it's always for the work that I do. So the things that I do is I try to make sure my mindset is in a good space, and that I'm receiving in non-judgment, and that I'm giving benefit of the doubt. That always giving benefit of the doubt, because that's what I would want, and receiving different in a non-judgmental way, and just really attending to my mindset when I'm engaging in these kind of difficult conversations.
Sarah?
I would build on that in all of that, I have a choice, right? Like I have a choice to engage. I have a choice to step back. I have a choice to confront. I have a choice to address an issue. I have a choice to become more connected with individuals. And so almost really exercising my power of choice is really impactful, because at the end of the day, the change has to begin with me. If I'm going to hope that others grow and change and that we create better understanding, that change has to begin with me. And so I have to make my choice.
Thank you so much for both being here today. I've learned so much, and I feel better equipped going into Thanksgiving, into holiday season, to have those conversations with those I love and care about, and be able to step beyond agreeing to disagree and having some meaningful and lasting conversations. So thank you, Gina, and thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. You're welcome. It was so good to be here. Thank you both. I feel like I had my own moments of self-awareness. So thank you for being part of that.
What a good conversation does.
Thank you.
You can stay connected with the Visibility Project by subscribing, liking, and sharing on your favorite podcasting and social apps. Look for us at the Visibility PRJ.
Financial support is needed to keep the conversation going. Go to midlandfoundation.org/give and select the Cultural Awareness Coalition Endowment Fund to be part of the project. Note podcast in your donation notes.
Thank you for listening.
We see you.
We hear you.
And together, we are making a difference.